Welcome to a special edition of Fear and Greed's Daily Interview. I'm Michael Thompson. Today is, of course, Anzac Day, so we've gone back into the archives to an interview recorded 2 years ago with Dr. Brenda Nelson. Now, I won't say much more because you'll hear it all from Sean Aylmer in a moment, but this interview was first published on Anzac Day 2022. And if you didn't hear it then, it is a terrific conversation. And if you did hear it 2 years ago, it is certainly worth another listen today. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. There are a few days more important to Australians than Anzac Day. It's a day when we honour all those who have fought and the many who died for this country. And in recent years, one of the most impressive ambassadors for Australia's military history has been Dr. Brenda Nelson. Brenda Nelson has had an extraordinary career, a medical doctor by training. He was the youngest ever president of the Australian Medical Association. He was elected to federal parliament in 1996, holding a number of ministerial portfolios before becoming leader of the Liberal Party. Since leaving politics, he served as an Australian ambassador in Europe and was the director of the Australian War Memorial in Canberra for 7 years. He's now the President of Boeing Australia, New Zealand and South Pacific. Brenda Nelson, welcome to Fear and Greed.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Sean.
I'd like to talk to you about Boeing because I think a lot of people would be very surprised to learn just how big the company is in Australia. But first, before we get there, you served for 7 years as the director of the Australian War Memorial. What does Anzac Day mean to you?
Anzac Day means everything to me, Sean. As Australians, we live in a country where we enjoy political, economic and religious freedoms. We're a nation where faith coexists with reason, free academic inquiry, an independent judiciary and, as you well know, a free press. And the paradox of life is that often it's the things most important to us that we have a tendency to take for granted. And Anzac Day, for me, is the reminder of those almost 2 million Australian men and women who wear and have worn the uniform of our Royal Australian Navy, Australian Army, Royal Australian Air Force, 102,800 of whom have given their lives for us and those freedoms, and an indeterminate number who bear ongoing psychological and or physical traumas and families who love and support them. So to me, it's a day in which the paradox of it, Sean, I realised after my first year at the War Memorial, it's not actually about war. In a context of war, it's actually about love and friendship, and love for friends and between friends, love of family, love of our country, and where people like you and me, or know men and women whose lives have been devoted largely not to themselves but to us and their last moments to one another. So it's a very important and emotional day for me.
What I always find incredible about Anzac Day is that my children, who are teenagers, all do something on Anzac Day. And, you know, the older ones play two-up, the younger ones want to go to the services. And this is a generation who really have never experienced, even, you know, our generation didn't really experience war like our parents' generation, but it just has this incredible flow through generations, Anzac Day.
It does, and you know, I'm 63 years of age, screaming to 64, and you know, old people have always said, "Oh, the young ones today, they're not as good as us," and so on. I actually think these young people today are better than my generation. They have, I've found, from my time in Europe when I was Australia's ambassador to NATO and the EU, and I spent so much time in the Menin Gate and in the cemeteries in Flanders. I find these young people, unlike us, have a voracious appetite to know and to understand. And every nation has its story. And for us, our story, if you like, has been largely forged beyond the stories of Indigenous Australians, who also, of course, at least 8,000 have served in our military, and our farming communities. Our story is tied up in our military service in both war and peace. So notwithstanding the most consequential geopolitical realignment in our lifetime, I'm actually quite confident about our future when I look at young Australians.
That geopolitical realignment, what's going on in the Ukraine at the moment, as well as the tensions with China, do you think it makes Anzac Day, maybe not the China part, but certainly Ukraine, people seeing that on TVs and on screens, it just makes it a little bit more pertinent almost?
It does. And look, one of the many privileges I've had is being Australia's Minister for Defence, and I'd always been proud to be an Australian, but basically reminded me of what is really most important in life, and to never take things for granted, whether it's family, freedoms, or anything else. And one of the towering giants with whom I worked was Robert Gates, who was Defence Secretary in the US through the George W. Bush and then Obama administrations. And Gates made the observation in the Wall Street Journal about 6 weeks ago that our holiday from history, as he described it, is now over. And he described the United States looking across at tensions in Eastern Europe and in the Indo-Pacific, and observing that, if you like, our generation who thought perhaps we'd left this behind, perhaps we have not. And I think Anzac Day now, and for me, by the way, Anzac Day is every day, but for Anzac Day now, I think we look at the threats to our security, which we had assumed, and I think it's even more poignant that we pay our respects to those who serve and have served. And the other thing that I find with Anzac Day, we don't say it. Perhaps I sound like a frustrated priest of some sort, but it's a day when you get to the dawn service, it's a kind of a recommitment to one another, to our nation and the ideals of mankind, and to whatever we do to try to do everything we can to avoid conflict.
Stay with me, Brendan. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Dr. Brendan Nelson, President of Boeing Australia, New Zealand and South Pacific, and former Director of the Australian War Memorial. Do you miss the War Memorial, the Australian War Memorial? I mean, it's kind of part museum, part shrine, part research centre. You, Brendan, did an incredible job running it. Do you miss it?
Look, I do and I don't. In fact, I've been appointed to the Council of the Australian War Memorial very recently, so I'll return in a governance in a different role. But Boeing, of course, proudly for well over a decade has been supporting the War Memorial, and so I've had a continuing involvement. Whenever I go to Canberra in my current role, which is regularly, I go across to the memorial. But one of the things I do with my life, when I get to the point where about 70% or more of what I'm doing this year is what I did last year, that's when I start to think perhaps it's time for someone else to have a go. And one of the concerns that I had, I'd been at the memorial for 7 years. Once you get past staffing and budgets, every day was different. There was a lot of emotion in it. I'd managed with our team and the support of Mr. Kerry Stokes to get the $500 million for the redevelopment, built the project team, did the preliminary works, and I thought it's time now for someone else to come in. So I miss it, but I don't miss it. I still get invited to do a lot of public speaking around veterans and veterans issues. I've just done a big thing for Legacy, one of the many charities that I'm actively supporting. So, I'm still involved. I'm often asked, by the way, Sean, whether I miss politics, and I say, no, I don't miss politics, but I do miss some of the people. And in a sense, the War Memorial's like that. So the pattern of my life has been I put 150% into everything, but once I finish and let my successors get on with it.
So, I want to get on to Boeing here, but there's just not that little bit of you thinking, God, I wish I was in an election campaign at the moment.
No, there's not. It's interesting. It was an immense privilege to be. I was the member for Bradfield, and as many of your listeners know, I was Minister for Education, Science Training, Minister of Defence, party leader. But of all of the things I did, the thing I didn't like the most was electioneering, getting out and kissing babies and standing at the train stations, knocking on doors, copying the abuse. And as you know, if you do it, people say, oh, the only time we see them is when there's an election on. And then if you don't do it, they say, oh, they don't care about us. And so, it was a part of the job I did not like, the electioneering. Definitely don't miss that.
Having worked in the press gallery, I must say, I think politicians are some of the most misunderstood people, because everyone in that place works really hard and generally does as well as they can. And I think we forget that. Look, I want to move on to Boeing. Now, I just didn't realise how big Boeing was in Australia.
It is. And coming back to it, by the way, when Boeing approached me about doing this job, I thought, I was approached by a number of companies and government side of things. But I was attracted to Boeing because when you think back over more than a century to those companies that have advanced humankind, Boeing is arguably at least in the top 10. And Boeing in Australia, it's currently the largest presence Boeing has outside the United States, although India looks like it'll overtake us this year in terms of headcount. And we've had a presence here for 95 years. And what also attracted me was the diverse portfolio of interest the company has. So, by the way, of the now 4,200 employees Boeing has in Australia, there's only a handful of Americans. They're basically 4,190 Australians. And the portfolio of interest in robotics, artificial intelligence, commercial airplanes, space, defence, of course, research and technology, and advanced manufacturing. I thought, this is exactly what I'd like to do. And the fact that the company had challenges made the job more attractive. And I'd had dealings with Boeing since my time as Minister of Defence. Some of them started off as quite tense and around a couple of projects we had, but the response that the company made, I actually said to Boeing when I was Minister of Defence, I said, look, you need to increase your investment in Australia. You need to further demonstrate a commitment to my country. And I'm not suggesting the company did it because I said it, but that's exactly what it's done. And it's just, I feel very proud to be the company president and chairman in Australia.
Look, I have to ask you about the air-powered teaming system. That's Boeing's first uncrewed system to be designed and developed in Australia. Now, I've just seen videos online. Very impressive.
Yeah. It's a great story, and a number of my equivalents in competitor companies have said to me, gee, this Loyal Wingman, or now the Ghost Bat as it's officially called, is just a magnificent project and good for Australia and good for defence industry. And you just think about this, Sean, that in around 2016, the company engineers and the people who work on new ideas were tossing around ideas for a disruptive military aircraft technology. And so from conceiving the idea, then to designing it, building it, and flying it was just over 3 years.
Incredible.
Yeah, I know. The first military aircraft designed and built in Australia by Australians, a very large investment by Boeing, for which I give immense credit, particularly to the American company for doing so. And then, uniquely, we've now got the Royal Australian Air Force, so in other words, if you like, the customer, that is co-invested in the project. And I give great credit to the leadership of RAAF and to the Defence Minister at the time, Christopher Pyne, for having the courage, and this is increasingly the model we're going to have to pursue, where instead of Defence having a shopping list and saying, well, these are the things we need, and going to industry and saying, what can you provide us with? In this case, we've come along with an idea, we've invested in it, we've developed it to a certain point, and then the government has said, okay, we'll co-invest in this. So it's an artificial intelligence or autonomous air-powered teaming system. It's an aircraft that has fifth generation design and flight characteristics. It has basically, it can fly extremely fast. I won't be specific, but it'll keep up with a Super Hornet, a Growler. It can fly with a wedge tail, an F-35. And we have flown it, of course, now, and we're conducting quite advanced testing with it. We have several aircraft we have now built. We've got half a dozen in different stages of production. It is designed for export, and obviously we're very focused on the United States and the US military, and we have a number of other countries that we're negotiating with at the moment, exporting it from Australia. And the other thing I know, which is really important to us, as it is to your listeners, is it's now about 75% of the value of the aircraft is actually Australian SMEs. And so BAE Systems has done an immense amount of work for us, but all of the 34 other companies, they're basically small and medium-sized businesses. I won't be too specific, but you've got a right through to a trucking company that's helping us with electricals, and engineering companies, electronics companies, and we're rapidly building the workforce for it. And we've got a very high-tech resin-infused composite manufacturing facility in Melbourne, which has enabled us to do the fuselage, which is 13 metres long in a single piece. And then the assembly facility, supported by the Queensland government, is going to be at Wellcamp outside Toowoomba, the airstrip there, and we'll be building that facility late this year and about 200 jobs there, by the way, for assembly of the aircraft. Like it's fantastic.
Great news story.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, Brendan, thank you very much for talking to Fear and Greed.
Yeah, thank you, Sean.
That was Dr. Brendan Nelson, President of Boeing Australia, New Zealand and South Pacific, and former Director of the Australian War Memorial. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.